Hello YouTube chess lovers and my friends, this is Gunjan here. Welcome to my 52nd episode of Dirty Chess Tricks. In this episode, I am going to show you one of the most attacking line and in fact a mini Rapruta against Benko Gambit. The good point I like about this opening is not only it contains a lot of tricks, but your opponent has to know the theory very well, otherwise game can be decided very quickly. The Banco Gambit arises after the following move order: d4, knight to f6, c4, c5. Now white grab the space in the queen side with d5 and accordingly black hit back the center with b5, gambiting a pawn. Well, white should certainly capture this pawn, and when black offers the second pawn for a rapid fast development, we should not capture it and instead of that develop our piece with knight to c3. And I think already black has to be careful. A good Benko player will understand that only a captures b5 is a right move, and in fact in the database most of the games goes into that direction. However, even I have seen strong players made other sideline moves such as g6 or d6, which I'm afraid a great deal of inaccuracy. The simple reason is against all these sidelines, let's say g6, white is going to continue with e4, grabbing superb space in the center of the board and giving extra option to capture this pawn with bishop. Here white is already threatening e5, so black has to prevent this with d6, and after that white can just develop their pieces on the natural square such as knight to f3, and with this wonderful center I don't think so white has any sort of problem against Banco Gambit. I have attached a model game in the PGN which will give you a very good idea how effectively white pieces can flow over the board and kill the black. So it is very obvious that no good Benko player will allow this, and they are definitely going to capture on b5, which is in fact the only logical reply. So as you can see, black get his pawn back, and if white become greedy and capture on b5, then resulting position I don't like it. So instead of that, I'm proposing this very cunning and tricky move, e4. So if now allowed, then white will definitely capture with bishop. So accordingly, black has to push forward with b4, attacking the knight, and the same time if the knight moves then the e4 pawn drops. So isn't that white has made a blunder in the opening? Well, of course not. This is all planned, and surprisingly enough white knight comes forward with knight to b5, which at first sight looks completely ridiculous because that knight doesn't have any backward route. However, as we are going to see, it has some amazing attacking potentials. We reach to the starting position of the Nescafe Frappe variation, and the first cunning trick I want to highlight here that if your opponent is not familiar with this territory, then he is likely to churn out this mistake, namely knight captures e4. Looks obvious, right? Winning a pawn. But this is the last time your opponent is going to capture this pawn, as after the move queen to e2, we are attacking the knight, and unfortunately that knight cannot move. Why? What happens if knight to f6? Yup, you guessed it. It is this amazing smoothest mate, which somehow if you get it, then you definitely want to post it on your FB page. Well, some of you says, okay, but I don't need to move the knight, I can support it, right, with f5. Well, yes, you can, but after f3, still that knight cannot move. The simple reason is, again we have knight to d6 check, and that knight also covered f7 square, and that means good night black king. So now it's clear that black cannot even touch that pawn, and more deadly is white is coming forward with e5, something which black has to prevent. So d6 is the obvious response at this position. Okay, no issues. White is going to continue with bishop to c4, once again offering the e4 pawn, which black dare not to take it. If you carefully look at this position, you may think, this time I can definitely take this pawn, as after the move queen to e2, the d6 square is protected, and now black can simply retrieve the knight back to f6, and everything is intact. Well, yup, the time being it looks like, but after white's next reply, bishop to f4, that d6 pawn is a simply goner. There is no concrete way black can defend this, and in fact after knight to d6, black position is going to crumble. So the only logical reply here is rook to a6, trying to get two pieces for a rook, but tactically this is not working. The simple reason is, after knight captures d6, rook captures d6, white has this deciding check, bishop to b5, which confirms the winning advantage. If knight or bishop comes in between, then the rook on d6 will hang, and if black still insists to play rook d7, hoping that he will get two pieces for a rook, but unfortunately what black missed out is his knight on b8 hanging, and simply white is going to take this knight, and on the next turn he is going to get the rook and in fact the game. So you can see how tricky these positions are, and still black cannot touch that e4 pawn. So accordingly, if you check this position in online database, you will find out that here there are two popular choices by black, namely g6 and knight b to d7. Now before I was making this video, I have done some heavy research, and my conclusion about those two variations are, in almost all the lines, white get tremendous attacking positions. For example, let's start with g6, which is one of the most popular choice here. So idea is very simple. Typical Benko style, black wants to play bishop g7 and castle on the king side. However, against Nescafe Frappe variation, this is not a good choice. Here comes one of the most aggressive plan by white, starting with e5. Attacking two spot, so black response is force, black has to capture on e5, and after that, can you guess it? Yup, absolutely right. Next pawn goes forward, d6, sacrificing the second pawn, and this pawn black has to take, otherwise knight c7 land with devastation, so e captures d6. And for the time being, black has two extra pawn, but the matter of fact is, he get a completely losing position after white's next dazzling reply, bishop to g5. So idea is very simple. What white wants to do is, he wants to capture this knight, and when black recapture with the queen, white wants to deliver this check which naps the rook in the corner. So to diffuse this idea, as I have highlighted over here, black has various responses, but neither of them are working. Let's see each by turn. The first move I want to consider is knight to a6, which on the surface looks so good as it covers the c7 spot. But just one move and black can resign. Did you spot it? Good if you find this move, as your tactical eye is very sharp. This queen is attacking two spots and black cannot defend both of them. So from this position, black is going to lose a piece and infect the game. Well, the second bad move is bishop to e7. So that bishop is required to protect on d6, and by moving to the e7, black has given up the control on d6. So white response is very obvious. Bishop captures f6, bishop captures f6, and now knight captures d6, which not only misplaced the black king, but after knight captures f7, white instantly get his 2 pawn back with a completely winning position. A sample line can run like this: queen captures d1 check, rook captures d1, and now as the rook in the corner hangs, so rook to g8 looks the only logical reply. Afterwards, we have this lethal move, knight to d6, which by force winning the exchange and infect the game. The third move I want to consider is knight b to d7, which is again not a good move if you know the refutation very well. Well, as happened in many cases, white has one lethal move which completely destroy black position, and here it comes with queen to p3. So idea is very simple. White want to capture on f7, and black cannot play queen to e7 as knight to c7 hangs the rook in the corner. So simply black cannot even defend on f7. And to illustrate how dangerous this position is for the black, we are going to now follow a game between two international masters where black decided to continue with knight to b6. Attacking the bishop, bishop to f7 is obvious response, and after king to e7, white continue with his energetic style, rook to d1. Picking up the loose d6 spot. Well, black tried to wriggle out with c4, but this doesn't turn out well, as after bishop captures c4, knight captures c4, queen captures c4. Yes, black can untangle his pieces somewhat with bishop to e6, attacking the queen, but after queen to h4, black position is not a pretty sight. Time being, he defend all the threat with king to f7, but rightly so, after knight to f3, once white will castle, black is literally asking for the trouble. He tried h6 to get rid of the pin, but as the rook on h8 is unprotected, white simply castle on the king side. And now finally king to g7 create the threat of h captures g5, and maybe black thought over here that I am right back in the game. But to his horror, white delivered this nasty blow, knight to c7, bam! And suddenly black get a completely losing position. The problem here is he cannot capture on g5. The simple reason is after knight captures e6 check, king to g8, and now queen captures rook, and in the next turn white is going to take the queen with a decisive material advantage. So that's not a good choice for the black. And in the game, black tried to save the rook with queen captures c7, but after the obvious continuation, bishop captures f6 check, king to g8, and bishop captures h8. Funny enough, black cannot even touch that bishop as his own bishop will hang after the queen check. You can check out rest of the game in the PGN, which only lasts for 25 moves. The fourth move I want to consider is bishop to b7, which is somewhat good reply against this variation. And against this, I am going to propose a very tactical line starting with bishop to d5. So we are taking benefit of pinned f6 knight, and black response is almost forced. He has to capture on d5. Afterwards, we throw this intermezzo, bishop captures f6, attacking the queen, and after queen takes and queen takes bishop, the rook on the corner hangs, and no matter wherever this rook moves, let's say rook to a4, afterwards we can continue with knight to c7 check. So already black king has been misplaced, and on top of everything, white has severe threats going on with queen to b7, attacking the knight, knight to d7, and now white has this winning move, knight to d5. So you can see the sequence is pretty much forced, and after this move, black queen has to stay in protection of d8 square, otherwise queen to c7 and then queen to c8 leads to the checkmate. Queen to h4, only logical reply, but after this white has just one move which kills the black, that is very calm but very effective, knight to e2. So not only stopping queen check, but white has a simple idea to play g3, h5, kicking this queen out of this diagonal and then deliver the checkmate on c8. Which, amazingly enough, not easy to stop. So for example, let's say if bishop to g7, then we have g3, queen to g5, h4, and once the queen move, we have queen check, king e8, and queen c8, checkmate. In one of the recent games, black has tried the move bishop to e7, which has a simple idea to safeguard the d8 square with the bishop. But unfortunately, this is not working as well. The simple reason is white has this deciding move. Bam! Threatening checkmate as well as on the rook. So black response is forced. Black has to capture on b6. Afterwards, we are going to recapture. And the problem arises that wherever this king goes, white queen will deliver check and then at the end, nab the rook on the a4 square. King d7, queen b5, game over time for the black camp. Last but not least, what happens if your opponent continue with rook to a5? Well, I must say, this move will be only played by your opponent which knows this variation very well, as this is one of the most critical response against Nescafe Frappe variation. Here black has tried various responses, but I am going to propose this straightforward move, knight to f3. Still black cannot complete his kingside development, as if the bishop moves, then we can capture this knight and then capture on d6. So accordingly, black has to get rid of this pesky g5 bishop, and h6 is the only logical reply by black. Okay, we are not going to waste any time in this variation. We will capture on f6, and after queen takes, we will first deliver this check, which will misplace the black king, and then knight comes back to the superior square, d5. Queen has the only logical response, queen to f5. So this sequence is almost forced, and after this, only thing you have to remember is play this star move a3, which has a simple intention to open up the a file and generate a quick attack against this weak black king. Well, if your opponent capture on a3, then I have attached a sample line in the PGN which will give you a great idea how to create initiative. But as per the database, there are only 2 games reached to this position, and in both the games black continue with queen to e4, which I personally think you are going to see in your game. Well, against this, my recommendation is you should continue with knight to e3, defending c4 bishop, and more or less follow up with the same plan. We want to castle and then open up the a file. One of the high level game here continue with bishop to a6, and in the game white continue with a captures b4, which at the end turn out well. But instead of that, my recommendation here is you should play knight to d2, an improvement of that game, And I think after this move, black is completely lost. Yes, you heard it right. As once the queen move anywhere, let's say queen to c6, the problem in this position is after knight to b3, that poor rook on a file has been trapped down. Rook to a4, what else? And after this, white has this dazzling move, knight captures c5, attacking twice on the rook, and in fact, engine suggests that black should capture this knight and give up this rook, which indeed doesn't turn out well, as after bishop captures c4, queen to e8, attacking the knight, and black cannot defend with the queen as the c4 bishop will drop, so king to c8 looks the only logical reply, but after rook to c1, by force, white will win the piece and in fact the game. Some of you ask, but what about the simple rook to e5, and we are more than happy to take a draw. That's not the case here because the forcing sequence continues with knight captures a6, knight captures a6, pawn captures b4, attacking the rook, and after rook takes rook, queen takes rook, knight to c7, and now castle on the king side. It's a case where the material balance has been restored, but look at the black development. There is hardly any piece developed on the king side, and on top of everything, black king is stuck in the center, which in many of this line has a deciding factor. Last but not least, what happens if your opponent continue with knight b to d7? Well, I must say after this move, white doesn't have much of the tricks, but white doesn't even have to sacrifice any material and get a good position out of it. So I'm giving you a sample line which will give you a very good idea how to play against knight b d7. White should start with knight to f3, and after knight to b6, attacking the bishop, we should preserve our bishop with bishop to d3. There's a small trick here guys if your opponent continue with c4, which is a blunder move, as white can simply capture this pawn, and after knight captures c4 and the move queen to c2, once again we trap the knight, as if the knight moves, then knight on c7 create havoc in the black camp. So accordingly, many games continue from here onwards with g6, trying to complete the king side piece development. But white is more than happy, as after the move b3, bishop to g7, bishop to b3, castle, castle, bishop to a6, and now the star move a4 not only confirms the space advantage by white, but white has many active plans from this position which you can try out. And the most important factor I like about this variation is there is hardly any Banko pressure on the queen side, which actually black is playing for. I have attached one of the model game in the PGN which will give you a very good idea how to play from this position. That's it guys. I hope you enjoy and learn this mini lecture on the Nescafe Frappe edition, which is one of my favorite attacking system against Banco Gambit. Just like me, you can do some research about this line as it has not been explored properly, and if you do your homework well, then I'm definitely sure that in the tournament practice you can score lots of points in this line. Thank you for watching this video guys. Feel free to write, subscribe and comment on this video, and I'll meet you in my next episode very soon. Bye and take care.